St. John's Gospel, chapter 1 and verse 14. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory. Well, first of all, could I say again what a great joy it is to be with you this week. Thank you so much for your welcome, for your hospitality, and for your response to all that God is wanting to do through his church here in this place. And it is a privilege for me to be alongside you this week as together we work out what kind of church does God want us to be? How might we respond to the gospel of Jesus Christ? How might we live and share this gospel amidst the confusions and concerns of our world? And you may think it's slightly odd to sing Christmas carols in July, but I must admit I rather like singing Christmas carols in July and August, because it reminds us that if the Incarnation is true, then it is not just true on the 25th of December, it is also true, I don't know what the date is, I've lost track of the time, whatever it is of July, it's just as true today. And the other thing is, I thought I'd try to give you a little bit of a European experience, because usually when you sing Christmas carols, it's the height of your summer, whereas over in Europe, of course, we sing them in the middle of winter. So that seemed another good reason for singing Christmas carols tonight. A few weeks ago, back home, a youth group from one of the parishes in the diocese where I serve were going on a pilgrimage we have the oldest church in our diocese, wait for it, was built in the year 654. It's old even by English and European standards, and it's where St. Ced, the apostle to the East Saxons, landed and built a church. And this youth group were on pilgrimage there, and when they planned the route, they worked out that they would be stopping near Bishop's Court, where I live, one night. They know I've got a very large garden, so they said, could they put their tents up in the garden? Of course I said yes. The following morning, I said Mass with them, I made them some bacon sandwiches, and we sat down for a chat. They had a few questions that they wanted to ask me. I don't think there's time for me to go through all their questions, though if you come back on another night, I might give you one or two more of them. They were really interesting questions. The first question one lad asked me was this. He said, is it possible, do you think, to make a hot dog that is so enormously big that God wouldn't be able to eat it? This was his question. Is it possible to make a hot dog that is so big that God wouldn't be able to eat it? Now, I think this is a profoundly interesting question, which touches upon the nature of God. And my hope for this evening and for these mission services, you might also be wondering, we've got a beautiful church next door, why are we sitting here in the hall? Well, the reason we're sitting here in the hall is that my hope, and indeed my prayer for this mission for the last couple of years, is that we might encounter, in these evenings, we might encounter the Christian faith as if for the first time. And so we're deliberately not in the church, we're kind of placing ourselves outside the church. And we're stripping back our faith and asking ourselves, well, what do I believe? And how should I respond to the call of the gospel? And then later on, I will invite you to make a decision to come with me into the church, to yet again recommit ourselves to Christ. So talking about the nature of God seems to be a good place to start if we're going to encounter the Christian faith as if for the first time. Because if you get the nature of God wrong, then you can be sure that everything else that follows will also be wrong. And the danger with this question, can you make a hot dog that's so big that God wouldn't be able to eat it, is that you are thinking of God as another thing within the universe. So bear with me, a little bit of philosophy of religion, just for a moment. The universe is made up of stuff, okay? There's microphones, there's lecterns, there's chairs, there's parish halls, there's human beings, there's hot dogs, there's stuff, there are things in the universe. And if you think that it might be possible to make a hot dog that is so big that God wouldn't be able to eat it, then you have also made the mistake of thinking that God is another thing inside the universe. Your picture of God, and I think many people, both in the church and those who've rejected the Christian faith, because they've never encountered it properly, that's what they think. They think that we think that God is a kind of superhero. So God is like, you imagine just how very, very powerful, I don't know, Superman is or Spider-Man is. Well, just imagine how powerful God is. God is the most powerful, the most superhero that there is, and therefore would be able to eat up any hot dog, however big you made it. But the point of the Christian faith and the Christian understanding of God is that God is not a thing inside the universe, but God is the source and origin of the universe. That everything inside the universe, be it a human being or a hot dog, is contingent upon the God who is the source of everything, the Creator, the one who is separate from the universe which He has made. And that's why it's both possible to know God and so very, very hard to know God. That's why so many theologians say the only thing you can say about God is what God isn't. And that's also why, well, let me tell you a story. A little girl one day comes home late from school. The mother is really worried. 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes go by. The mother is convinced that something terrible has happened to her child. 20 minutes go by, 25 minutes go by. The mother is on the verge of phoning the police, fearing the worst. 30 minutes go by. And just as she's in the most terrible panic, the little girl waltzes in through the back door, safe and sound. The mother sweeps the little girl up in her arms, so pleased that she is safe. But as is the way with us parents, relief quickly turns to anger. And the mother says to the little girl, "Where have you been? Didn't you know how worried I would be?" And it turns out that all the while the mother has been worrying herself sick, the little girl has been next door. And the woman next door who the little girl has been with has recently been bereaved. And the mother, furious that the little girl has been next door all this while she's been so worried, says to the little girl, "What have you been doing worrying that poor lady next door?" "Oh," says the little girl, "I've not been worrying her, I've been comforting her." Well, the mother really is rather cross now and says, "Comforting her? What could you possibly do to comfort her?" "Well," says the little girl, "I climbed into her lap and I cried with her." Now, in one way, there's nothing much else I want to tell you about the Christian faith than that. That when we Christians talk about God, we at one and the same time talk about the God who is the source of everything, upon whom everything, human beings and hot dogs, are contingent, the God who is known but also so incredibly unknowable. That is the God who in Jesus Christ has, as it were, emptied himself of what it is to be God in order to know firsthand from the inside what it is to be human. And that now, when we Christians talk about God, we are talking about God as we see God in the person of Jesus Christ. That in Jesus Christ, it's almost as if God has stopped being God in order to know what it is to be human. All those wonderful paradoxes that Sister Avril pointed us to in that glorious hymn. The one who is the Lord of heaven and earth is now a baby crying in a manger. And this is the great beginning and foundation of Christian faith. And many people try to overcomplicate the Christian faith, though once you have the foundation in place, the Christian faith is startlingly simple. Hard to live out day by day, but startlingly simple in the claims that it makes. The Christian claim is this: that God in Jesus Christ became one of us so that we can be one with God. God, as it were, came down to earth in order that we can be taken up to heaven. That Jesus is a meeting place between heaven and earth, a meeting place between God and humanity, a meeting place between life and death. And in Jesus, all this comes together. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And that word incarnation, I'm sure some of you know what it means, but if it doesn't, let me just unwrap it for you. Incarnation, it has the same roots as the word carnival. Or even more precise, it has the same roots as the word chili con carne. When you eat chili con carne, you are eating chilies and flesh. Chilies and flesh. Now that's what it means. That God becomes flesh. That God becomes one of us. Why? Well, God wants to climb into our lap and cry with us. God wants to communicate his love to us. God wants to make himself known to us in the only way and in the only language that we really understand. And that is the language of another human life. In Jesus, God speaks to us, through us, as one of us. I remember when I was a teenager, I think my father must have either had a pay rise or foreign holidays got cheaper, but for one reason or another, when I was about 11 or 12, we started going on holiday to France each year. And my father, I'm afraid, was a very typical Brit abroad, that he didn't speak anything other than English. And I think he really believed that if you spoke loudly and slowly in France, French people would understand you. Or else he thought if you learned maybe one or two words in French. Once you'd said them, you kind of unlocked the key to the mysteries of the French language. And having said those one or two words, you could now speak in English quite normally and people would understand you. You know, and you know how embarrassing parents are at the best of times. I can remember with my brothers and my sister kind of in the back of the car, hearing my father say bonjour to someone and then speak in English loudly. Eventually I kind of said to him, Dad, look, there are two choices here. Shut up or learn French. And do you see that's what God has done? That God has chosen to, as it were, learn French. God has chosen to communicate himself to us in the only language we understand. So that he could communicate his love. Because he is not a thing inside the universe. He's not Superman. Because he is the God, the great God, the source and origin of everything. The only way to communicate his love to us was in the language that we understand. The language of another human life. When I was a very little boy, my mum used to say to me when she put me to bed, she used to say to me, Stephen, if I lined up all the little boys in all the world and walked up and down the line, guess which one I would choose? I would choose you. And I can still remember my mum saying this to me when she put me to bed. I can still remember the affirmation of that love. And so when I became a dad, I started saying this to my boys. You have to be careful when you've got more than one child, you've got to get the age categories right. So I'd say, if I lined up all the 4-year-olds or if I lined up all the 6-year-olds, guess which one I would choose? I would choose you. And I think I must have said it to my boys rather too often and slightly debased the currency, because after a while they started saying it back to me. So I'd be putting them to bed and they would say to me, if I lined up all the dads in all the world and walked up and down the line, guess which dad I would choose? I would choose you. And you know, the funny thing is, it kind of worked. That when they said this to me, I felt the affirmation of their love. In a funny kind of way, it worked better. And the reason it worked better is because I know that I am not the best dad in all the world. I am very, very conscious of my failures as a dad. But the point is this. The point is, it's not that I'm the best dad in all the world. It's not that they're the best kids in all the world. I'm their dad. And they're my kids. And that's what makes the affirmation of the love so real. And it is the same with God, our loving Father. That he sends his Son into the world with a message. And here, I kind of feel slightly embarrassed that I don't have something more wise or profound to say to you. Except the very heart of the declaration that God comes to speak to us in the only language that we understand, the language of another human life. He learns the French of humanity and he says, I love you. And he says, I choose you. I choose you. And I don't know why you're here this evening. I don't know why you go to church. Some of you are here because, well, you probably didn't get a choice because you're in the choir. Or you're on the serving rota. And you think, oh, bloody hell, I've got to be here tonight. And maybe some of you just were curious. And we'll come along to the first one and see how it goes. And we may come back later in the week. I don't know why you're here. You thought, well, Father Hugh's a nice bloke. He wanted to have the mission. We better come and support him. I don't know why you're here. But I put it to you that the reason you are here, whether you know it or not, is because of God's great love for you in Jesus Christ. You did not choose me, says Jesus. I chose you. I chose you. And I call you. And I long for you. My heart overflows with love and compassion for you. And the reason that the affirmation of God works so well is because also, sorry to spoil the party, also we are conscious of our failings. Sin is something that doesn't, I feel like, I've got an unwritten book. The title of the book is Come Back Sin, All Is Forgiven. Because we've stopped talking about sin in the church. It's kind of ironic, really. Our culture doesn't understand sin. In our culture, we don't want to be forgiven, we want to be understood. But is there anybody here who has not had this experience? You go to bed, you're lying in bed, you're turning over the events of the day, and you're thinking to yourself, why did I say that? Or why didn't I do the other? In other words, all of us fall short of our own standards. All of us fall short of our own standards, let alone the standards of God. And we are conscious of our shortcomings and our failings. But that just makes the affirmation of God's love more glorious, more wonderful. You see, God doesn't just know us, He also loves us. And I think we can't quite get our heads around that. We can get our heads around somebody knowing us, but if they knew us, well, obviously they wouldn't love us if they knew what we were really like. On the other hand, we can say, well, they might love us, but they love us because they don't really know us. And I'm also aware, how blessed was I? How blessed was I? What my mum said to me when I went to bed. What greater blessing can there be that one human being could give to another the affirmation of love? And yet I know that there are many, many, many people in our world who've never received that, whose lives have been broken and beaten down and damaged and abused and exploited, and all of us in different ways carry scars and memories of hurts and horrors. And I say to you, God knows you. He knows those hurts. He knows those horrors. He knows those scars. He knows those failings. He knows those shortcomings. And He loves you because of them. And He longs for you to know the affirmation of His love. He emptied Himself of what it is to be God, and He became just a few cells dividing into life in the flood tide of Mary's womb in order to say to you, I love you. I choose you. And I long for you to know the blessings of my love. I call you. So the invitation of this mission is simply to hear this afresh. to hear it as if for the first time, and then to respond to God as if for the first time. And in a moment, you will be invited to come into the church. We will give you a candle, and think of that candle as a votive candle, as an offering of prayer. And in your heart right now, ask yourself, what is my prayer? What is it that I long for? And please pray for yourself. Give yourself a gift and a blessing. What is it that you want for yourself more than anything else? And as you hold the candle, hold before God a prayer. And then come with us into the church and come right up into the sanctuary and place your candle down as a sign of your prayer. And also, with your service sheet this evening, each of you was given a response card. You don't need to fill it in this evening. You don't have to fill it in at all. But when you are ready, tonight or tomorrow night or Saturday or Sunday, when you are ready, write down on this card what your response to God is going to be as a result of this mission. This mission which wasn't Father Hugh's idea. This mission which wasn't my idea. This mission which wasn't Bishop Graham's idea. This mission which is God's gift and blessing to this community that his love has put together. This community that he longs to use to make his love known, not just to you, but through you, to this community that you serve. And on the card, there is a space for you to write down what your response is going to be. And sitting in front of the altar for the rest of this week will be a basket. And simply, when you are ready, fill in the response card, place it in the bowl. You don't need to put your name on it. This is between you and God. And then these responses will be offered in the Mass on Sunday morning. You'll also have an opportunity to receive another card as a reminder of the response you've made. And then, when we are inside the church, when we have placed our candles down, the invitation is to watch and pray. Because this service doesn't really end. I mean, it will end, it's perfectly all right to go home, but it has no formal ending. We gather in the church, we lay our candles down, we stop, we watch, we wait, we pray. Stay for 2 minutes, stay for an hour. It's entirely up to you. But there will be some refreshments served back in here for you to come and get when you're ready. But first, watch and pray. And if you want to talk to someone, if you just want to talk about what your response might be, if you want someone to pray for you or to give you a blessing, if there's some burden that you want to lay down, whatever it is, please come and speak. I'll be in the Hanfield Chapel, which is to the right of the altar as you look east. Father Hugh will be in the Lady Chapel, and Sister Avril at the back in St. Peter's Chapel. And in each of those chapels, we'll sit on a chair, and next to us is an empty chair. Just come and sit down. If you want to chat, if you want a blessing, if you want a prayer, if you just want to talk about where you are with God, please come. As we go into the church, there is a time of response. And please, come back tomorrow. Please, come back tomorrow. And come back on Saturday, as through these services, we focus on the great truths of our Christian faith and hear them proclaimed afresh. And maybe, if you come back tomorrow, think about bringing someone with you. Is there someone you know who would benefit from hearing the words of the gospel shared? Pluck up the courage to give them a ring and say, I'll pick you up and we'll come along tomorrow evening. Everyone is welcome. So let me finish with another story. As you will have gathered, I like to preach through telling stories. There's a good precedent was set for this by a very, very famous preacher who always, when he spoke, told stories. Just trying to remember what his name was. It'll come to me in a minute, I'm sure. But he tended always to tell stories. So here's a story. And this is a story from when I was a vicar. And I was vicar of a church in Chichester, and it was a small, modern, post-war, red brick, fairly dull red brick boxing church. And we because it was a small building, and we, thank God, got quite a large congregation, at Christmas, the only space to put the crib was actually under the altar. And we had some really lovely, large crib figures, but we needed all the space for the seats. So we put the crib under the altar. So this was a Christmas morning, it must be 20 years ago, Christmas morning, and I'm kind of preaching away my Christmas sermon. And while I'm preaching, Miriam was a member of our congregation. She'd have been about 2 years old. While I was preaching, Miriam toddled out from her seat and toddled up to the altar where there was, the crib scene. And I'm sure some of my brother clergy will have had this experience where you're preaching and people have stopped listening to you because something much more interesting is happening in the church, and you're sort of carrying on. By the way, I think it was probably like that with Jesus at Capernaum. When they raised the paralysed man through the roof, Jesus must have been quite cross. He's preaching away, and one by one he's noticing that everyone's looking up at the ceiling rather than listening to him. So I had that experience. I'm preaching away, but I know there's something going on behind me. Not quite sure what it is, but that's what everyone's looking at. But what happened was this. Miriam had toddled up to the crib, and to begin with, she just stood there looking at the crib. And then, very, very carefully, so as not to wake the baby, Miriam climbed inside the crib. And she climbed inside the crib and she sat down. And she sat down for the rest of the Mass. She just sat there. And so on that Christmas morning, as people came up to receive communion, as they came to see the Christmas crib, there was Mary and Joseph, the angels, the shepherds, the ox, the ass, and Miriam. And I've always held that story in my heart as a story of the invitation of the gospel. It's so easy just to walk all around the gospel of Jesus Christ, prodding it from time to time, wondering what it's like. In the end, the only way to find out if this gospel is true, I can't persuade you or anyone of its truth. The only way to find out if it's true is to climb inside. And in order to climb inside, small children do have an advantage over us. Because you do need to make yourself small. You do need to let go of a lot of baggage. You do need to bend down beneath the lintel of the door of Bethlehem. And that's the invitation now. In a moment we're going to go into the church. We are, as it were, going to go to Bethlehem. And if you like, you can put your candle down, look at your watch, come and have a cup of tea and go home. But could I invite you to do what Miriam did? And just spend a few minutes, longer if you wish, but at least a few minutes, just being there and asking for God's blessing upon you. Oh, come, all you doubtful, pensive, and confounded. O come, all ye curious, to Bethlehem. Come and behold him, born in human likeness. O come, let us consider him. O come, let us consider him. Christ the Lord,